lot of respect for Hideo Kojima's Metal Gear franchise, in the same way one respects a huge rampaging gorilla in your campsite in the hopes it'll be satisfied with smearing the contents of your picnic basket over its floppy gorilla tits. Metal Gear is, much like all Kojima's work, an absolute six-lane pile-up of disjointed emotional tones, inconsistencies, and terrible overwritten dialogue, but as a scholar of narrative gaming, I'm impressed that Metal Gear is one of the very few examples of a series that maintained a single continuity all the way from the 8-bit era to the present day. At the very end, Metal Gear Solid 5 was still part of the same timeline of events that began with Metal Gear 1. A $1 million AAA open-world hybrid stealth action-based management game was somehow a prequel to a bleep-bloop top-down pixel stealth-em-up from 1987. Basically every other franchise with similar staying power has indulged in more than a few puffs of the reboot pipe, whether in the soft or hard sense. They at the very least will have retconned some stuff. Not Metal Gear. Established canon is god as far as Hideo Kojima's concerned, no matter how awkward it might get when framed from new perspectives. It's one of the things I weirdly respect about him, but at the same time it leads to some unique problems of its own, and that's what I wanted to talk about. You see, after playing through Metal Gear Solid Delta for review recently, I came to a startling conclusion that all of the notorious nonsense of the Metal Gear canon stems from one single fact, that the main villain of the first game was named Big Boss. And this is something I can only marvel at, considering what little thought must have gone into that decision at the time. The original Metal Gear was a relatively standard G.I. Joe versus the evil global terrorists action movie plot, and while I don't pretend to have any particular insight into Kojima's thought processes, I'm confident in saying he probably didn't write it with the eventual full extent of the Metal Gear canon in his head. I think he just called the villain Big Boss because that's what he was. At first he's Snake's commander and main support NPC, and at the end he does a classic turncoat twist, but either side of that he's still a stock character, just goes from Big Boss as in Stern Commander to Big Boss as in James Bond villain. And let's not pussyfoot around it. It was really fucking stupid to flat out call the Big Boss character in the game Big Boss. That's something a 6-year-old would call themselves if they were playing heroes and villains on the school playground. But Kojima did it, and subsequently committed to it, which brings us to the next game, Metal Gear 2 Solid Snake. What about Snake's Revenge? Yeah, we don't talk about Snake's Revenge around these parts, kiddo. One of the recurring aspects of Kojima's writing is that many of his characters are utterly defined by their code names. Who, for example, was The Fear in Metal Gear Solid 3? Scary dude with crossbow and detachable shoulders, yeah, but what was his real name? What school did he go to? Has he ever fallen in love or owned a hamster? None of that matters. All that does is that he's called The Fear and consequently is a scary bloke. And when Kojima named his villain Big Boss, he inadvertently wrote himself into a corner because then no other character could occupy the role of Big Boss in the plot. There was no one called Bigger Boss, and so inevitably Big Boss had to return as the main villain of Metal Gear 2. And after Big Boss finally died at the end of that game, every villain that followed in the subsequent Metal Gear Solid series had to in some way stem from Big Boss, whether it be his son, or his clone, or his clone's son, or his unrequited obsessive gay admirer, or his unrequited obsessive gay admirer being possessed by his clone's son. It was all Big Boss all the way down. I can see why then it made sense to Hideo Kojima to do a prequel. He must have realised that Metal Gear as a franchise had done so many laps of Big Boss's butthole that it was getting samey, and the only logical next step would be to pull out of Big Boss's butthole, explore the origins of the character, and try to figure out what had been so enticing about his butthole in the first place. And as we've already established, code names are what define everything in Kojima's world, so the process of exploring the character's backstory inevitably involves the backstory of the code name. In Metal Gear Solid 3, we are introduced to Jack, or John, another name choice that probably didn't require much thinking time, but it doesn't seem to matter much. Big Boss before he was called Big Boss, and was merely a jobbing infiltration expert mentored by a hyper-competent female soldier named The Boss, which seems to be some kind of official title rather than a nickname, one that is acknowledged globally, as she's well known to all the Russian characters as well. Christ only knows what international body bestowed it. We don't know what her real name is. Again, it doesn't seem to matter that much. The point is, The Boss goes rogue and Jack has to kill her, after which the fucking president shakes his hand and says, with a straight face, "Since you surpassed the boss, now you get to be called Big Boss." And Big Boss responds with a mildly disgusted look, somewhat mirroring my own, as I thought, don't tell me that's what this whole thing was leading up to. I have so many questions about The Boss. The series delves into her backstory a lot more than it does most of its characters, but everything we learn only raises further questions. She was the first person in space before Yuri Gagarin, but they hushed it up because... ? Oh, apparently because the mission went wrong and she almost didn't survive, and the American government ceded the glory that would come from the first manned space mission because they were afraid of coming across like a bunch of fuck-ups. Boy, have I got bad news for you, American government. Also, the boss fought on the front lines of the Normandy landings when she was, checks the dates, 19 years old, and gave birth on the battlefield, but then they took the baby away, they being the omnipresent group of powerful dudes who secretly run the world, called the Patriots or the Philosophers at various points in the series, whose mysterious agenda is second only to nanomachines when it comes to being used to hastily spackle plot holes. Why and how did the Philosophers take her baby away? Who knows? Actually, more pertinent question, why was a heavily pregnant woman leading the Normandy landings in the first place? I know a lot of people praised MGS3 for the emotional impact of the final battle with the boss, but frankly, I just can't take her seriously. Listening to her backstory is like listening to one of those pathological liars you went to school with. Yeah, I fought in the Second World War, actually, and basically won the whole thing, but it was in a secret unit, so you won't have heard of it, and I was so good at soldiering, they made up a whole new title just for me, and I was pregnant and gave birth, but you can't see the baby because they took him away, because I'm just so good at soldiering, they didn't want me to stop, and the father was my super hot boyfriend who can levitate and talk to dead people, but you can't meet him because he goes to a different school, and also I shot him in the face. So the character is ridiculous, but that's by the standards of actual human beings rather than entities conjured purely to act as functionaries for the plot. Basically, every game that followed MGS3 is about all the ways Big Boss and his contemporaries tie themselves in knots over what the boss would have wanted, and everything goes to shit because the boss was such a vaguely defined character that what she actually wanted is severely open to interpretation. The boss is a prop, a character with no function except to embody this concept of a perfect, self-sacrificing mentor to motivate Big Boss, brought into existence for the sole purpose of establishing why Big Boss is important, and the reason Big Boss was important in the first place is because he was named Big Boss. That's basically my thesis, and again, how astonishing is it to think that an entire franchise's worth of continuity could sprout from one single throwaway decision to name a villain the way a repressed office manager would name their penis. Imagine how differently the series might have formed if Hideo had called him, I don't know, Randy Andy. Just goes to show, I suppose, even the most labyrinthine of canons have to start somewhere. Famously, the entire Terminator franchise grew out of James Cameron having a nightmare about a robot skeleton rising from a fire. Think of everything that led to. Jimbo has one nibble of cheese too many for supper one night, and 25 years later, Christian Bale gets really angry on a film set.
This video is brought to you by Land Party Adventures, a nostalgic single-player adventure that blends detective storytelling with a retro tech management simulator. Your buddy Pedro is AWOL, so you'll have to take point on setting up LAN parties at various spots around town. Connect VGA cables, install software, and manage download speeds, all while avoiding viruses. Because if you get one of those, you'll have to tell your parents, and you do not want to tell your parents what you've been searching for online. Hubba hubba. Don't add hubba hubba. Any other of those noises is fine. Plus, there's a sandbox mode where players can create and share their own LAN parties using over 100 customizable items, including vintage furniture, classic computers, posters, gaming consoles, and more. All this on top of solving puzzles while you and the gang uncover the mystery of your missing friend. If you're into cozy life sims, solving mysteries, and nostalgic 2000s vibes, this one's for you. Just remember, this was before incognito mode was invented, so clear them cookies, y'all. LAN Party Adventures hits Steam on September 18th, so head on over to the page now, give it a wish list, and hop into the demo to transport yourself back to the simpler times of this sound.